Hi, Ez. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Miriam. It is a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Looking forward to geek out about facilitation and play and the role that play plays when we're in actually non so playful or hard situations.
Yes, I'm very looking forward to diving into this conversation. It feels like an emergent field. So who knows what's going to emerge from our conversation today?
Exactly. And let's start with a little warm up. I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
So I do call myself a facilitator, and I also have all these other terms that are sort of part of feel like an umbrella or something. I'll say creative experience designer, process consultant, coach, all these sorts of different things. But I definitely use the word facilitator as an anchoring point within all those different labels. And I started calling myself a facilitator. I was working in a self-managed art of hosting inspired facilitation firm for I say art of hosting, which is a sort of school of facilitation. I was working there out of university for about 4 years, and it was quite a transition. Meaning that when I arrived there, even though I'd studied communication and human relations, I didn't quite have the ability to hold space for a group, especially when the going got tough. So I began to call myself a facilitator when I was able to lead projects, and the projects would go south, would go bad, and I would still hold it. And then I think at that point, I kind of felt like, okay, this concept works for me.
I love that. It's like you gave yourself permission that you earned the label.
I earned my stripes. Yeah, definitely. I was.
And do you recall the situation? I'm very curious to hear about you handling the situation, walking out of that with this maybe sort of pride, like, yay, did it.
Well, I remember the situation that comes to mind is that I had was failing. I would I was leading an activity, and I would give the instructions, and the group would kind of be like, huh? Mm-hmm. But I would push through. I'd be like, I see you're not getting it. Let's keep trying at this. And I would keep going and then finish. And then in the feedback piece was receiving feedback from my team that all these things had not been good, but I had succeeded. It globally had worked. So that was the moment where I was like, yes, I did it. Yeah.
And thank you for mentioning that. I think we've all been there, and sometimes still are there, that maybe it's not a good day, or we just explain it in a way that the group doesn't get it. And it's just by pushing through. And what did your team mean by you succeeded? Was it that finally you could get them do this exercise, or that what happened to call it a success?
I think it was that there was I can talk a little bit about my perception of success as well. It was a storytelling lens activity. Sort of, I think in art of hosting, they call it a collective storytelling harvest. And the idea was that you would listen to a story through different lenses. So it could be a lens of strength or beauty or challenge, and then you'd exchange it with groups. So I think in that case, the success was the fact that the activity was meaningful. People had beautiful exchanges. We were able to make sense of the story, take learnings out of it. I would just bounce onto that and say that my own vision of success, I don't care that much if the instructions are perfect. I'm totally fine with a rocky trip as long as we reach the intentions of the event or the training or whatever it is. So I'm not so much of the school of thought of let's make it perfect and slick and clean and organized. It's I'm take whatever route we need to arrive at those original intentions that we've set.
Which makes sense. And now I kind of have to push this question right afterwards. So what would make a workshop fail?
Right, this question, the famous question, what makes a workshop fail? So for me, it's really when the person is not able to adapt to the people who are in that room in that moment, doing those exercises, because I think in the whole thing of a facilitation, having a plan, or the notion of having a plan, is an illusion of sorts, because you can have a completely detailed agenda with the timings and everything, but then maybe this theme or this energy emerges in the group and it's alive. And I think that the workshop would fail if one stayed to the plan that was there and ignored that energy, versus like feeling into that just incredible energy that is naturally growing and that no one planned. So that's, I think for me, that would be a moment when I would fail, if I felt as though I hadn't really been able to listen and really adapt to what was happening.
Yeah. And this makes total sense to me. And it almost sounds as if this strictness, this following the plan and ignoring what has happened, is sort of the antidote to play. Right?
Yeah, nice. I like the way, I like you putting them on that spectrum. Definitely. Of like, let's organize this. We're doing this A, B, C, D, E, versus kind of a thing that you can't see me, but I'm kind of like waving my arm, just like, ooh, like I wonder where this will go. Maybe we'll experiment. Maybe we'll fail. We'll definitely have a fun time. Definitely, I'm much more of the second, the latter. That being said, I do obviously have clients with deadlines and schedules and need to be organized and professional. But I think it's that art of having all those things, but also not having that rigidity and not having that sort of stuckness and that not adapting to that moment.
It's interesting that you're mentioning that. And I wonder whether for such clients who are usually very strict with their deadlines and very structured, does it then come to them as a relief that finally they have the opportunity to be a little bit more loose, a little bit more dynamic and spontaneous? Or is this kind of throwing them out of comfort because it's so different from what they're used to? What's your experience?
I've had lots of clients over the years, and some clients that have really enjoyed that. They felt like it's a breath of fresh air, because they're able to sort of perhaps see a wider landscape of what's possible. And there is that sort of notion of that alive co-creation that's there. And I've definitely had other clients that have given me that feedback of really wanting to like tone it down, rein it in, organize it more. So I think I'm fairly adaptable as a facilitator. I definitely have worked in different contexts with nonprofits or with companies or sort of philanthropy and stuff. But I try and stay closer to the clients who can vibe with me, just because it's easier for all of us and we have more fun, versus trying to rein it in for a client that wants something that's a little bit more structured and traditional, because there's lots and lots and lots and lots of people that can offer that service. And I'm always happy to refer people. I really believe in the relationship with the client. Like when I say a relationship, I mean a life-giving, positive relationship that you want to be seeing each other. So if after a few meetings you're like, this is feeling flat, it's like, well, regardless of the money or whatever, maybe it's not a good fit.
Yes. Yeah. Hell yeah.
Like, hell yeah.
And if the energy is not flowing, if we can, I think, to me at least, what I hear, it boils down to us being able to be our authentic selves. And if we have to hold back and we cannot use the energy that we usually bring in, or the playfulness, or whatever it is that makes us, or that defines our facilitation style, then we will also fail to allow the participants to join with their authentic selves, which is basically, at least in my understanding, the goal of a workshop, that everyone brings their entire being in and all their talents.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. If you're showing up fully as your complete, vulnerable, imperfect, trying self, then someone can show up and be like, well, I'm just a person as well. I guess I can be. And I think on that point of play, like sometimes people talk about play as though you need to be like, ho, 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 ho. It's like that kind of high energy, extroverted play. But for me, that's one version. There's so many ways of playing. Some people have super really subtle, deadpan senses of humor with like little jokes here and there. There's all sorts of puzzle type game things. There's all sorts of experimentations that you can do that are not at all about being loud and playful and dancing around in the room. Although that's also a lovely form of play.
So what definition of play would you then apply? So what means play for you in your facilitation? How did you actually get to explore play as a tool or as a method?
Well, I see very much play as like a state of being, one that's very much has a whole number of different characteristics, as I see it, just around curiosity and openness and pleasure and experimentation and right to fail, collaborating, working with people, co-creating. And for me, I think I really stumbled upon play as being sort of a pillar of the work that I was doing when I realized that as a facilitator, I was creating, I needed to be able to create the space that I dreamed of in this world, in that room, in that interaction. So for instance, that image of a snail, you had a little snail that's going along the path and has this shell. And this idea that, okay, there's a shell and I'm going to invite people into my home, very intimate, it's my home, it's my inner space, and we're going to have a party, an event. And what is that event going to be like? And for me, that answer might look like different things to different people. And for me, the answer was, I want it to be full of a playful vitality. I want us to be able to experiment and laugh and cry, have amazing conversations, be fully ourselves, go to really new depths, new areas of thought and exploration. So that's how I see my facilitation, is offering that space. And the dream and the idea is that in those interactions, those small group spaces, that ripples out. We need a place to practice. We need careful, intentional spaces to practice, and then people can go off into their own lives and experiment in their own ways. But I just need to be really, really clear about what's in my space, how have I curated it, and how have I cultivated that own sense of play and safety and sort of pleasure there.
So much to unpack. The first thing that came to my mind is, as children, we play in order to practice for real life, right? And that's what animals do. They play so that they're prepared when they grow up to adjust to certain behaviors. And somehow we have unlearned that, to use play as a tool to practice.
Right. And yeah, exactly. Animals, they practice a lot of like power games, like, like growling, submissive, dominant, trying out whatever the skills are they need in the world. If it's like hunting, or if it's, children will often play with sort of dolls or Lego kind of interactions. Yeah. And I also want to name that there is this notion in the field of play of like going back to what you love to do as a child. But I'm totally for that, yes. And I also want to honor that how we play might evolve as we grow up. And some kids didn't have spaces to play, or maybe they were in environments where the way that they like to play was not available. So all I have to say is that I definitely think that going back to that notion of like original ability to play is beautiful. But if for whatever reason you didn't feel like you were able to access that as a child, regardless of whatever is going on, I really see it as a birthright that is available to us throughout life, and it can change and look like different things at different moments.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I somehow had the mindset in mind when I referred to the children at play, because children are not afraid of judgment, at least until a certain age. And I think that's where then the shell of the snail, it's as if children were naked snails. And then suddenly you have this shell. And you have to be very careful whom to invite in and how. And so how do you create this, or what kind of environment do you need in order to invite someone in, and for them to come out of their own?
Interesting. That's the question. Hey, people are showing up like, okay, how do you create the environment with all the experiences that people are bringing, their days, their lived experiences, everything? Someone recently told me that they didn't want to show up to a workshop because they would just criticize everyone. And and they said, I'd rather save people from myself. And my reaction was very much, well, the whole point of the facilitation is to build a container, to build the agreements, to have like the slow steps that allow you to be at your most loving self and to be interaction in a positive way with everyone. And so it is my belief, and I've seen this happen with people with, quote unquote difficult personalities, that if you are able to be really intentional in building that container, again with the group agreements, with really making sure that at every step of the way there is that psychological safety for everyone that's there, that people understand the intention of the space, I think that you can invite people in from whatever and really have a meaningful and generative exchange. But I think that's also like a belief that I hold front and center, that, and I hope that participants can pick up on that, because I do believe that they are fun and caring people. I do. And that sometimes they need some support to let that side of themselves come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somehow, or I wonder when is this put in danger? Because I do also believe that if we are very honest to ourselves and we feel safe enough, we can all admit that this is the place where we want to be, where we don't feel judged, where we can show up as our true selves. But then somehow the corporate environment very often turns, especially middle-aged white male, into beings who struggle to admit that. How would you deal with this beforehand, or is play then an instrument to crack the shell slowly?
Michelle, and that's like, such a great line of inquiry of how do you go into a corporate environment with these middle-aged white men who are serious and organized and professional, and bring in this sort of rhetoric of play, or bring in this dynamic of authentic communication that maybe does not connect at all with them in that moment. I think that's it's a really good question. And I really like working with adults because I really like working with that specific dynamic. For me, it's really fun because it feels playful to me because it is such a mask. So for me, I almost see it as like a fun challenge, because I know that everyone has an inner life. I know that everyone has vulnerability and has a desire to connect. So if someone's giving me, serving me a certain, professional, I have no emotions and I'm just here to perform, I'm like, oh, that's totally fine. You can definitely play that role. You're invited to play the game. And hopefully we can, through the interactions, naturally, like I say, that group feel will build up to a point where suddenly they feel like they can take a little step outside or to a lateral step from that role. I want to share a story with you. Actually, because I think it's nice to talk about things concretely as well. Like I had, this is a story of failure. It was a corporate workshop, and there's an activity where sometimes it's like a nuclear bomb. Sometimes it's a ship where you need to vote people off the ship, and or vote who's going to be in the bomb shelter. So it's not a politically correct activity at all. It's very it's basically designed to provoke conflict, because the idea is you have different profiles of people. So, Jenny, who's 55 and she's a nurse, but she's an alcoholic, that kind of thing. And each person has their so-called pro and con. Anyway, so I was doing this in a corporate workshop, and it was the first time I was doing it online. And normally it's just in person. And so you just write the characteristics down and you have the conversation. We did it online and we added photos. And because we added photos, people chose people of different races, different ethnicities in the photos. And so I had not thought this through or really seen this as a problematic dynamic. And anyway, so we went through the activity, and then at the end, some of the persons were extremely distressed. They were with the activity, with also the fact that they were talking about who to save, quote unquote save, and that race was playing a role in this. And I thought it was just completely offensive, inappropriate, not thought through. And there was a mix of people having that reaction and a mix of people kind of in that sort of stoic, I'm not going to have any emotions right now. So in that moment, here's the question: how are we playful in this moment as this ship is sinking? And so, and in that moment, what we did was, or what I proposed to the group was, it was one of the themes that we were working on in that training series was open communication in difficult moments, and this was a difficult moment that required open communication. So I said, well, let's practice some of this feedback, and I'm going to use myself as a guinea pig. So who can give me, who would like to offer, we had sort of a framework of different ways of giving feedback. Who would like to offer me some feedback on this? And it was, and I received it. And interestingly, they weren't able to go all the way into how angry they were. So I was like, okay, who else would like to give the feedback? You can really take off your gloves. You can really give it to me as you're feeling it. And someone was able to do it and really just like give me all of their negative experience and activity. And in that moment, I was able to receive it. And they're able to, and everyone is watching this happening. And for me, that feels like a playful moment, because we're navigating, we're playing, and we don't know what's going to happen. And they're also seeing, we're practicing for a moment in their team when they're also going to have a hard moment and they're in a hard conversation, kind of like those little animals playing. So that kind of thing, I hope that it kind of shifts, even if someone looks like they're not evolving. And there is a shift that's there. We got feedback from the manager that training series had been helpful for people from being more direct. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this anecdote, which makes me realize that, makes me think of another conversation I had about games, that the beauty of games is that we can invite a group to adopt a new set of rules for a certain amount of time, and therefore, don't take the situation so seriously. So what you just explained sounds similar, by just reframing it into a game and saying, okay, we are practicing now the tools that we have learned beforehand, makes everything possible. And wow, kudos to you to just stand there stoically and say, okay, give me all your feedback, and using this as a use case.
I really like what you're talking about, rules. With rules, you can add anything. You can make any kind of interaction. And it's like there's so much playful possibility there. Being like, we only ask each other questions. We're deeply interested in each other. That's the game. We're suspicious of each other. Like, this is very much from the world of improv, where it's like you add a rule or a concept or a frame, and suddenly it's like, hello, nice to see you, with that suspicion or that care or that curiosity. So that, I mean, there's endless endless possibilities for remixing the way we show up every day, the way we interact with each other, through adding those rules, those constraints.
Yeah. And you just mentioned improv, and I know that you have also experiences in clowning. So I would be curious, what is the role of play that you would, or is play in the context of clowning and improv and facilitation the same or different? And how do you use these experiences for your work now?
Yeah, so I would say in terms of play, I definitely see it as the same across the board, because there's like a joyful presence. There's a joyful presence that's there in all three of them. And the way I use it now in my work, well, I think for me, I want all the contracts and all of the things I do to have that sense of fun and co-creation and vulnerability, like I was saying. And you look at improv is all about the yes and, building on each other's ideas, getting that sense of like, oh my gosh, we're going on an adventure. No one knows where it's going. And if I can get that dynamic, the group, amazing. Clowning has this extra dimension of that the authenticity in clowning is what makes it funny. A clown is someone who's trying their very hardest, and they probably aren't doing it that well, but they're giving it their all. They're giving it their all, and we're laughing because we see that our humanity, this poor struggling being that cares so much. And I think that reminds us of our own struggles. We're trying so hard with these little fists in the air, but it doesn't always work. I trained in clowning and improv and just different, I guess, artistic practices when I realized that it was I needed that interior expansion. I needed that interior expansion, and that would not just come from facilitation. Just facilitation. I needed to go into other disciplines to have that sort of inner ability to expand and almost like have that spark that if I want to share it, I can share it outwards.
Can you share your journey? I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, well, my journey is that in that regard, I think for many years, I was just, I was shy. I didn't want to be judged by people. I wanted to be shy and didn't want to be judged. Those are two things that were important to me. But I had this sense of I could feel, I needed to crack this shell or this thing. I had no idea how to do it, but I just decided it was kind of I'm going to do everything. I want to do everything that I can do because this is just not working for me. So I did freestyle dancing, I did improv theater, I did clowning, I did music, I did anything that I could do that would be scary, that would be hard, that would feel like it was helping me creatively expand. And it's one of those things where it was a journey, and it's a journey of a lifetime as well. But at a certain point, I felt as though it did kind of crack open. At one point, I took a speaker into the street with music, and I just danced through the street to my own music. And the goal was for me to celebrate and just be and have people. Some people hated it, some people didn't care, some people loved it. But for me, it was I needed to just have that inner expansion. So that's what kind of led me to weaving in those practices into facilitation. And to your question of how does play show up for me? It's just like you were saying with the facilitator, you being a reflection of where the group can go. For me, it's completely linked, and the group hopefully can go to a place of improv and clowning and enjoying each other. Yeah.
I find this fascinating and intriguing that. So your journey, yeah, some people hate it, some people love it. And I think for a facilitator, and I believe as much as for a clown, it's important to find comfort in not being liked, which is maybe the most difficult one. So it's not our job to be liked, because we sometimes often need to challenge the group and to lean into this discomfort of doing something for which we might not get the approval or the sympathy of a group. And I'd be curious whether you are now, after this journey, well, if the journey ever ends, do you feel more or less empathy for participants who are not willing to go there and open up?
Would you like to repeat the question? Would you like to repeat the question?
Do you feel more or less empathy with participants who are not willing to go there, those who hold back, don't dare?
Dare. That's thank you for that question. I feel so much empathy for people that don't dare and are scared. I feel complete care and compassion for them. And I think I feel complete joy for someone when they are willing to take a risk. So I think I'd like to think that I have perhaps a different angle of relationship to different people at different stages along that path, but definitely the holding of everyone would be there. It's definitely an orientation, but I do try and go into a group not being like, oh, you're my favorite, oh, you're fun, you're not fun, you're like me, you're not like me. I'm really trying to say, what are we Like, what are we together and like holding? It's that energetic holding of the space. And because it is going back to the idea of the shell, it's like you are creating this utopia. You're creating a utopia in a moment where the space is held, where people are loving and caring and listening, where you can have beautiful experiences and debrief them together. And in that sense, I'm not trying to be like I'm in the street. I'm trying to create another space. With my family, my extended family, there was these decades of conflict, and there was this sense of we are not connected. And I started having like a monthly chat with everyone at the beginning. And I held the frame really strongly. And it was, whatever it was, 20, 30 people. And I'm being really careful to make sure we're all listening, people getting a chance to speak. There would be a theme. There was a way I was holding it, really holding it. And after, I think over a year of those conversations, we were able to move into informal conversations with less facilitation, still some facilitation. So look at that training wheel thing. So anyways, in answer to your thing about empathy, I'm trying to give it to everyone. And if it's, like I say, it's an orientation, of course, there's going to be a participant that I'm like, you are having a bad day and it's annoying me right now because it's blocking our work as a group. But I would say the orientation, the underlying thing is me trying to say, where are they coming from? How can we integrate their needs into the group? How can we be together?
It's fascinating what you're saying about your family, and I'm curious to hear more, because I believe that we cannot facilitate and participate at the same time, just because we are invested, and we cannot really hold the space. Maybe I'm wrong. So I would be curious how it was for you, because also I remember my failed attempts of trying to bring my family together to talk about difficult issues. And each time I hear, we are not your clients, don't try to facilitate us. Miriam, can you just speak normally to us? So not very well received, total failure. So, and maybe it's because my family is very small. So we're talking nuclear family. Maybe you just need more people. But what is your advice? What's the magic sauce? What did I do wrong?
Well, first of all, I want to just like recognize and honor you for trying, because that's a big gift that you tried to give. And that's to bring your professional practice and to bring it to your family as an offering. That's beautiful. And if they weren't able to receive that, that's also hard, because it's a gift that you offer to the world, right? And so for me, what's the magic sauce? So that's interesting. One thing that comes to mind. So I have a big family of 8 people in my family, my immediate family. I have 5 siblings and my parents. And we came to a breaking point. We came to a breaking point in communication and conflict, where I think people were able to feel it as well. So there was the problem that people were realizing we actually need help on this. And I think I also was able to show them through moments and experiences where we could get to. So we did at one point on the beach, for instance. On the beach, we were all there, and at the end of a family trip where everyone was exhausted, like angry, frustrated. And I drew a line in the sand and said, this is a stage. And it's like, everyone's like, what is going on? And it's like, it's time for a roast. A roast is where you make fun of people. And so we all made fun of each other, imitating each other over the past 2 weeks. And it was hilarious. Like we were just laughing, and it was a moment that felt real. So anyway, I think there was the problem. People thought there was a problem, and I think I was able to show them what might be possible. And in terms of the point about neutrality, I definitely am explicit about that. And in many cases with my family, I was explicit about putting my own role, either making it explicit when I was speaking for myself, or saying I'm putting it on a back burner. I'm okay having my own conversations separately with you all, because I think it would be challenging if I would use the facilitation for me to speak first, for instance, or for me to prioritize my own ideas. But I have enough of a relationship with everyone that I was able to say, we'll have our own conversations, and I'd like to hold the space for all of you.
Love that.
Yeah.
And I love the roast idea. A friend of mine once said, in every joke, there's a piece of joke because all the rest is just truth. And
so good.
because
So
usually you
good.
say, oh, in every joke, there's a piece of truth. No, it's the other way around. And using play to actually to give permission to raise the obvious, but to laugh about it. I think that's magic. And it reminds me of a tradition that they have in Burkina Faso in Western Africa, where in order to overcome difficulties amongst different ethnicities, they it was a former president who came up with the idea of they call it parenté de plaisanterie, so that there are different ethnicities who are related to each other, and they have permission to make fun of each other. So whenever they would meet in the street, although they don't know each other, but they recognize that they're from this parented ethnicity, they would start to insult each other and really make fun to then end up laughing together. And this was their way of overcoming ethnical problems.
That is so powerful, because if you're able to laugh with someone, laugh at yourself, laugh at them, it builds so much trust. And it's funny, we're always talking behind each other's backs all the time. And here you're actually daring to just say it to their face. Thank you for sharing that tradition.
Yeah, it's nice. And still, I think it needs a very safe container and the facilitated space, because it can also go wrong.
Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. When you're going to these emergent areas, of course, it can, if you know, the higher the risk, the stronger the container. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
It reminds me of, I used to box a lot. Mm-hmm. And when sparring is huge fun. So it is play. But then there's this moment where there's one punch that is a little bit too strong, and it wasn't intentional. But then there's the adrenaline or something, some hormones coming up, and then you get stronger as well. And suddenly you went from a sparring to a real fight without even realizing it. Right. And I can imagine that with these games where you use a real reflection in a fun way, it can be very subtle, but then become a spiral. So how would you avoid that? Or what do you think if someone in the audience thinks, oh yeah, I'm going to try that, a roasting? Mm-hmm. What would be your advice or your guidance to avoid a spiraling that can be hurtful and harmful?
Mm. Yeah, I think spiraling is really well said. I think the metaphor of boxing is also so strong, because you're like, ha ha ha, and then I was like, you're like, oh, how dare you? Well, I do like to think of I have the word in French, échafaudage. It's a scaffolding, the scaffolding, and that burning thing. I would never do it unless it was like a team that really knew each other, sort of a team that had been working together for a year and really had such high levels of trust. I do like an activity on active listening, for instance, active listening, and in arguments, like when it's this idea that if you're in an argument or you're in a conflict, you need to both hear each other first before going into a solution space. But the thing is, you can't do that active listening activity on a real conflict, or not a real conflict, on a big conflict, because it's so it brings up so much, and suddenly you're in the deep water, and suddenly you're flailing, and suddenly the exercise, you're triggered or whatever's happening. So the way I do it is finding that really small little step. So find a very small thing that you disagree on. For instance, a TV show that one of you likes, does not like, a food that one of you likes, does not like, something that is just complete, you can talk about it, but it's just not going to bring up that much in theory. And then you practice the active listening on on this, on that specific thing. So let's say you loved the TV show Friends. One person says all the things they love about it. And the other person's role is simply to active listen. It's just simply to be there and to not question, not judge, not defend. And then they go and they share why they don't like it. Saying whatever, it's just like an endless loop of relationships that make no sense. And the person, okay, I hear for you. It doesn't make sense. It just keeps going on and on, all these relationships. And so that's like a very small step. And I think I love going to the deeper waters with a group, but it does need to have that scaffolding of really building like a success in that first level. Then maybe trying it on a second level is a little bit more real. And then if you're, going, yeah.
And then would they paraphrase, or what happens after the listening? So I listened to an opinion that is not mine. Mm-hmm. And what am I doing with this opinion? Am I just acknowledging, thanking, paraphrasing?
Yeah, so I definitely provide sort of different strategies on active listening that can include just being silent, that can include nonverbal just acknowledgement, that could include paraphrasing, that could include repeating, that could include reflecting the content or the emotion that you're hearing. The main point, I think, is beyond the actual active listening techniques, is to stay focused on the other person and to not be focused on your own reactions to what they're saying, which sounds so simple, but actually, honestly, if the whole world would learn how to do this, I feel like all romantic relationships would just be 10 billion times better, because it's the trap of one person saying something and then the person, as opposed to really being present and really tuning in, being like, what do you mean? Or it's having a question of like, I hear you saying this, or this is what I'm understanding. Is that what I understand? Is that what you're saying? Going into, yeah, well, you did this to me as well. Or yeah, but it's just that whole, it's like the very basis of dysfunctional conversations, which is why I like that activity, because it's the very first step of a beautiful generative conversation, is just to hear each other. Yeah.
Yeah, not to get taken away with our emotional response.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I have so I'm polyamorous, and I have different relationships that I communicate a lot with, or different connections, I might say. And the other day I was connecting with someone new, and I think at one point I was like, oh my gosh, let's have some conflicts so we can practice listening. And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, he's like, what is going on in your mind? I'm like, no, of course, if we can communicate beautifully through the conflict, it's a beautiful sign, and we can practice and get better together. He's like, okay, but I hear that.
You must say, I never date a facilitator again.
Never date a facilitator again. I think we make great people to date. It requires a little bit of knowing when to put your hat on and hat off. Like when are you holding, and when are you just a person that's just in the interaction? And if you can manage that dynamic, it works well. What does not work well is the total control of everything. Like, I will control this relationship and our interactions and all of the communication. And the person's like, whoa, calm down.
And I'm asking all these meaningful questions, and I'm holding the space, and I'm such a good listener. And what I realized, that very often when we are taking our facilitator's hat off, we're actually the worst of all of that.
That was a good burn. Like, that was a burn for facilitators. Good job. Very nice. Exactly. It's actually very pompous. It's a very pompous posture of thinking that one has such good communication, one is so much better. And in a friendship or in a relationship, it's kind of like, who do you think you are? Like, we're all trying here. And just because you work in this does not mean that your knowledge or your experience or your methods are more valid than mine. So I've learned this the hard way, and hopefully I'm a little bit more humble in this regard. Thank you to all of my exes for your help in that regard.
And still, I like the idea of practicing conflict, especially early in the relationship, or because then it still has, and it can even be a professional relationship. You were speaking about a romantic one, but I think in the early days, we are more forgiving because we have less expectations. I think the better we know someone, the more expectations we have, because they are supposed to know us, and they are supposed to know, and they are supposed to whatever. So to have a game of practicing conflict, and also to communicate what our relationship to conflict is, because I think it mostly depends on how we grew up with it and how our families deal with conflict. If someone is very articulate and is used to, so for instance, in my family, we fight very loudly, very passionately, but then it's also forgotten very quickly. So we love each other very loudly and passionately, and we hate each other very loudly and passionately. And I think for someone who comes from a family where they don't speak about conflict, or where nobody ever shouts at each other, be quite intimidated or even threatened if I would then raise my voice, which doesn't happen so often anymore, luckily, outside of my core family.
we can have a conflict in this call if you want. We can definitely we can bring that. I like the thing of what you were saying before about the rules, and that's what's magical about facilitation is you can say, hey, I'd like to have a bit of a conflict here. Are you comfortable with, like, I'm feeling some big emotions. Are you comfortable with me raising my voice? Are you comfortable, like, what's the parameters here? Because some people love yelling, like loving loudly, fighting loudly, and then it's over. But for other people, when someone raises their voice, the whole body can just shut down. And then that goes in the whole world of sort of trauma responses and how we've been trained, like you said, in our family to interact, and how we run away. We run away, or we freeze, or we fawn, or fight, or whatever, when we're feeling threatened. So I'd like to think that we can create these sort of magical realms where we're like, let's have this conversation, let's frame it a little bit. And I think that would be a healthy form of facilitation in relationships, which is why facilitators make great people, in my opinion, because it takes sort of macro level thinking, a second level thinking of what the relationship is, what's happening, to propose that kind of activity or propose that kind of entryway into conflict.
Yeah. And I think just the ability to look at dynamics in the conversation in a group from a meta perspective, then I think the high art is just to remember our superpowers when we are in these situations. It's like, I have a problem with left and right. So I do know that I'm writing with my right hand, but if you ask me where's left and where's right, I forget about that.
Yeah.
Literally no clue where's left and right when I'm under stress. So, and I have the impression that as a facilitator, it can be similar, so that when a conflict really arises, that we forget about these superpowers and the rules and the way of dealing with such situations. What would be your advice to remember when it's important to remember?
Oh, so you have a superpower. Suddenly, the shit has hit the fan, as we say. Things are going very badly, and just not shutting down. How to remember that you're, oh my goodness. Yeah, so I think the place where my mind goes for that question is very much that place of like showing up for ourselves first. That first thing. I think of an example. I was in a fight with someone, or it was a difficult emotional moment with someone, and I looked up, and so I was having my whole emotional reaction, and I looked up, and the other person was texting on the phone, and I was like, "Oh right, this is a moment for me." I was like, "Thank you for reminding me. This is actually a moment where I don't need to get my support from you. I'm going to actually provide to myself." So I think my first step would be, if you're disconnecting from your gifts, is like to tune back in, give yourself the support, the listening, the care that you need, which is, it's the whole self-soothing, it's the meditation, it's all those practices where we show up deeply for ourselves. And I think that my belief is that when we are feeling heard and cared for, which we can provide to ourselves, suddenly the superpower is like, the ice blast, the fire, like, oh, right, I can do it. And in that story that I told you about, the first story with that failed exercise, or with my family, the family conflict thing, I'm working actively to self-regulate. I'm not just like, oh, this is so easy. In the family conflict conversation, we did an exercise where my brother gave me direct feedback in front of the whole family. to practice as well, having these hot conversations. And his feedback was around me not showing up and not being available and not feeling like I was there as a brother. And my role is to listen and support him in that moment. So of course I'm regulating. That's not easy feedback to receive. And someone's like, I feel like you're not showing up in the way that I want you to. That's not easy to receive. But I think that if we are able to listen and care for ourselves and be our own champion, then we reconnect with our superpower in that moment.
Yes. And thank you so much for sharing this so openly.
Mm-hmm.
Really appreciate that. I want to acknowledge it. Because there's so much, I think we can all relate to these situations and how much it hurts and how difficult it is to just suck it up. And what came to my mind was the image of the snail again with their house. So we can have this empathy and show up as our best selves if we feel safe. So then if we don't feel safe in the environment or with the person, then how can we create the sense of safety for ourselves so that we can become these empathetic humans that we would like to be and that are needed in this moment in order to calm down the conflict?
Oh yeah, so well synthesized. Exactly. If we're not feeling safe, there's no way we can create that safety. And my belief is, with the conflicts that are happening in the world right now, there are these huge macro conflicts. But from the angle of facilitation, they go down to conversations between each other and conversations we have with ourselves, which is why I think that facilitation has this healing power for the world, because it would be hard to say, well, okay, I'm going to heal international relationships between different countries. That's hard. But what we can heal is how we're treating ourselves, how we're showing up in a hard moment with someone we care about. And that does have a ripple effect when you think about everyone doing that.
Yeah. Especially acknowledging that it is a hard situation that everyone deals in a different way with.
Yeah.
And I wonder, unfortunately, let me first acknowledge that my slogan is, we can change the world one workshop at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then seeing a war kind of happening, which seems so useless. And then I wonder, how could this have happened, and what has failed? How many conversations before have failed, and who has actually failed to listen to whom? And so this makes me very sad, because I share the hope that with facilitation skills, we would, with more facilitation skills, with leaders with better facilitation skills, who would live in a better world. And to bring it back maybe to our topic, so we talked about a conflictual situation within a group and how play, improv can help to solve that or to get to a better place. How would you use, or is it even appropriate to use play and the concept of play if the group as such is not in conflict, but there is this difficult situation in the macro environment?
Right. So it's like let's say there's a context of, you could say a context of war, but it could also be a context where a group has been really hurt. And so how would you be showing up in that moment?
Yeah. Can even be the pandemic and a lockdown. I mean, we've all experienced that for 2 years.
So one of the things I like about play, and I think this ties into what you're saying about the current war in Ukraine, is that it encompasses, it's not just happy. It's not just let's be happy. For me, it's everything. So it's both hopefulness and despair. It's both laughing and crying. It's it's both like the expansive everything, then it's curling into a ball. For me, it's that notion of being alive fully. And when you look at children playing, I think people often focus on the side of them like laughing, but children actually fight. They cry, they hurt each other, and it's part of it. So I think when I think about a workshop that involves play in a really difficult situation like that, I think that it's bringing it in to experience the fullness of your being. And you can go into the ideation of the activities of what that looks like, but it could be something like writing a letter from your anger or from your sadness, or it could be role playing. If you were the world leaders involved, what would you be saying? It can be, there's so many ways of honoring the emotion and the depth that's there while still playing. It's, for me, like I say, it's easier to be like, oh, well, playing is just gonna be fun. Well, it's gonna be fun because you're in the fullness of your being. And I like having both the hopelessness and the hopefulness being part of it, because I think it's the non-duality, right, of this world. We can be both incredibly happy and incredibly sad at the same time. And that's hard to reconcile and to learn. But I think that we, again, through these spaces, we can be like, it coexists, it's all together. And I'm not sure what better way to do that than through the imagination and through play.
Can you give an example for an exercise for that? I'm curious.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I do. For when you say for that, I said a few different things. For that, in terms of an exercise that would give space for sadness, for instance. Oh my goodness.
For sadness and happiness. So this kind of these
oh
oppositions.
Yeah, totally. Well, a really simple one would be kind of inspired by psychodrama. Would be having in a group of two. And again, I would start with a low risk thing, not not the highest one, but where you both choose. You could take two. One person has the role play of having that voice or that emotion, and the other person has another emotion or another voice, and you have a conversation, a question or a conversation. You both are just holding it and giving voice to that part of you that's like, no, there's nothing will change. Like this, I mean, lunch is going to be horrible. Like I can tell, I've never been in a training before where lunch is good and there's never enough. And the other person's like, yeah, but there'll be snacks. There's gonna be snacks in the afternoon, and oh, maybe it'll be a surprise this time. And I heard them say that there's, and just like, but not just the mind, bringing your body and like having the posture, and then switching and seeing what comes out of like giving space to those voices. That would be a really simple way that you could just play with breaking a binary, because in a third phase of the activity, you could be like, choose whatever voice you want and just experiment with your body and your voice and exploring a question, but again, giving access to those different states within yourself. Yeah.
I like that. It's the improv that comes into the space of.
One thing I like to do that's very, very corporate retreat friendly, which is also sort of imagination activity. I know that a lot of facilitators that listen to this. I want to make sure to give some tools, some ideas. There's this thing. It's a form of like a theoretical speed dating. Mm-hmm. It's a thing where everyone's going to see everyone, and especially when you're trying to have different stakeholders that are trying to imagine a collaboration or potential projects together. And the theoretical speed dating is that each time for the 2 minutes, you have to imagine a theoretical project, a theoretical way that you could collaborate together. And it doesn't mean you're committing to anything. It just means that you could, in theory. And what it does is it breaks up this thing of like, I need to commit, it's going to be forever, or you need to. It invites you to the super playful thing of like, what could we do together? And you can imagine it. You could imagine it with anyone. You could meet someone in the street who's cleaning the park. And you can be like, hey, what's the collaboration we can do together? Like, is it an art piece? Is there a workshop that's here? Is it whatever it is? So, but I would say the link between this one and the past one is it's giving yourself that space to imagine a new interaction, a new way of being that normally you wouldn't explore.
I love that. And I used it similarly once in a session where everyone introduced their superpowers and then imagine what could happen if they would combine it, or they or they introduced their project they were working on, what would happen if we combine them. What I hear from you is even a step further with unrelated things. And I was just wondering, to come back to the opposites and to conflict, what if we find something where we're not aligned at all? So where we're clear opposites. So what sort of collaboration, how could this actually help in a collaborative situation?
Oh, I like that. Totally. How could these perspectives, how could we help each other? Or in what ways are these perspectives, and what ways are these perspectives useful to the other one? Like you can do these like Jedi mind tricks, so suddenly you're like, and there is an answer. There is definitely an answer.
Yeah, where you're forced to actually embrace this total opposite of yours in order to create something together using this. I think this can be quite empathy building.
That's beautiful. And there is something deeply beautiful about conflict, because we learn so much, and it breaks us out of our own way of seeing the world. And like there's other people here who have other experiences, and we can learn from them. But it does take training us to see it as that life-giving thing, and not seeing it as this like life menacing thing that's like, oh my goodness, I'm in danger right now, I need to shut this down.
Yes. And it's so difficult even for ourselves. Me sitting there observing with curiosity the anger expanding in my body. So, oh, okay, where do I feel it? And then, of course, it helps because we cannot be angry and curious at the same time. So the moment we are curious about how we're feeling, and our physical reaction is already the best kind of solution. And still it's painful.
Oh, so painful, so painful. Mm-hmm.
So I think to get a group to that already requires the safety and the buy-in from the group, that they're willing to go there.
I have an invitation to everyone who is listening to this, especially the facilitators. I worked, a group of people I was working with for a long time they were facilitators, and we had an explosive conflict, and we were talking about facilitators. Facilitators know to have very meta conflicts of, this, you should have been doing this, you weren't doing this kind of entire elaborate castle of belief and assumptions. And we never debriefed. We never did a closing circle. And so when you're talking about facilitators, and I forget their superpowers, I think it's really easy as facilitators to have this whole rhetoric around building beautiful spaces and helping clients learn communication, or whatever. But I think when push comes to shove, I think it actually involves showing up in those hard moments, especially with other facilitators. So my invitation is, the next time that you're experiencing a conflict where the reaction is like, oh no, like I don't want to deal with this, I don't want to show up. My invitation would be to just try, and it will be hard. I guarantee it'll be hard, but I guarantee there will be learning. There'll be learning, and there'll be something that will come out of it that you could not have gotten if you just stayed away. So that is my invitation to facilitators around the world.
Thank you. And how would you structure that? Because I think, how did you call it? The learning circle? No, the
closing circle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone would just share at the end? Or how would you structure that to really harvest the learnings from the conflict?
So for a closing circle, my framing of that circle, and in that case, I tried multiple times to have it happen, but it wasn't possible. But my framing of it is not to arrive at any solutions or even to arrive at any learnings, but simply to hear each other. Because again, I go back to that because just that is enough. Just hearing each other with empathy and or compassion, and just that's enough. And if learnings come through, if solutions and future collaborations and future projects and blah 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 blah, the whole thing, but that's already a next step. Until people feel heard and respected, none of that will ever happen. So that's what I mean by a closing circle.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being so explicit about that, and it makes total sense now. It makes sense because just speaking without receiving a reply or response already creates this relief because we don't feel judged.
Yeah.
And if everyone shares without anyone jumping in and commenting, it also forces us to just sit there with our disagreement, and eventually it will pass.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to get solved. Like they can coexist.
Yeah.
You know, you can like strawberry ice cream and I like chocolate ice cream, and I'm not going to make you like chocolate. You're not going to make me like strawberry, but we can see each other and hear each other, and that already is just it's such a huge step. It's a huge step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which becomes more complicated if then we have to decide something together. But then I think it comes back to the rules. How do we want to take decisions in a group? How do we want to move forward?
And I love those conversations. I love like whatever, you know, consensus or consent or, you know, majority vote. Like there's the whole decision making matrices and frameworks and everything. But I do go back to that first point of until you've heard each other with respect. It's just like there's no point in going further because that essential. It's like the frame is not there. The foundation is not there of the relationship of the group field. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Acknowledging everyone who's in the room.
Mm-hmm. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. What's that?
Otherwise, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but we want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be celebrated. We want to have beautiful moments in our lives. We have some of these common factors that we all sort of these needs and wants that are there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions, Miriam.
Yeah, thank you for sharing so openly. And it's, I'm just amazed how we went from play to conflicts, back to play, through all these vulnerable places, and how to facilitate relationships and families.
Totally. That's what these are my passions. These are things that I think about and I care deeply about them. So I'm really happy to share them with you and with anyone. Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything that you wanted to share that we haven't touched upon?
I think I would just reiterate that idea that we talk about play, we talk about like lightness or heaviness. It just like there's this notion of like separating them, but it's all the same. It's part of the same circle. So I would just repeat that in terms of when it comes to play, in terms of the kinds of activities we're developing, the posture that we're developing around it. Like it's a rainbow. It's a really with all of the colors as part of it, with that deep sort of curiosity and pleasure at its center. And I just repeat that because I think that if we can feel legitimate, be like, oh my gosh, can I play too? Even though I'm like introverted and adult and I haven't played in years, or I'm nervous or I don't even know what to do. And the answer is yes, because that's part of the spectrum. It's part of the spectrum.
And before closing, how would you deal with someone who doesn't play by the rules? So, and it can be intentionally, it can be by accident. How do you call that out, call that in? How do you deal with that without putting at risk this container that you created, but also not to, because I think if it happens once, you can maybe let it slip. Then you don't want this to be contagious, similar to this circle.
Yeah. Oh, well, so I have a philosophy around relationships in regards to this. Actually, I think about it as like a route. And I'm not sure, I can talk about my own experience. There have been moments in my life where people have been disrespectful. And at first I was like, oh, the first 2 times I was like, I'll let it slide. And then it would just get bigger, 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 harder and harder and harder. And there's that expression in English, like nip it in the bud. And I actually, in a group, once we've set agreements, I actually, the very first time, like the very, very, very first time anyone is not following any of the agreements, I will immediately address it. I'm not kicking them out of the group. I'm immediately addressing it and having a conversation, like in that moment. And I think that what I've noticed with groups I work with is when they see how seriously I'm taking it, it becomes a safer space, because they're realizing that I'm not just going to be like, let some things slide, other things not slide. They're seeing I'm like a ferocious protector of what we've decided upon. And so whether that's in a relationship or in space, I think there is something very powerful about that very first time someone does something, just being like addressing it. And if they react poorly, or they're not able to address it, then you can move on to a next step of like, well, maybe this is not the space for you. Maybe this is not the relationship for us. Maybe blah, 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 blah.
Thank you. Yes. And it shows that you have the courage to enforce the rules, that you're taking it seriously, and then everyone can trust. It's basically trust building.
I have a friend
and certainty.
I have a friend who has curated everyone in her life, her relationships. The moment that someone is not respectful and caring and loving towards her, she addresses it. If it isn't addressed and received beautifully, that person is gently shown the exit door from her circle, her life. This person is surrounded by loving, caring, respectful people that just deeply admire her. It's like she has a garden of life around her. And it's from that immediately. So it's a little bit, it is harsh, it can be harsh, but I think that the impacts of it are beautiful. And again, I'm not saying remove them from the group, I'm saying address it immediately.
Yeah. And I think it's, there's a difference between being blind to radical candor or blind to different perspectives versus addressing the way how we want it to be addressed and being treated with respect.
Oh, exactly.
I have full respect for that. Yeah. How can we cultivate our own gardens of supporting?
Yes, and then dance around in the sunshine, like, woo! Or the rain. Who knows? Who knows what the weather is going to be that day?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ez.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miriam.
It was a delight.
A delight for me as well.
That's the end of my podcast jingle.